Well, good evening. I think it's 6 o'clock. I may be a little slow, I'm not sure, but it's time for Tales and Cocktails. And the rain is pouring down from Ida. If we get competition with thunder, so what? Anyway, tonight I want to read you another short story, excuse me, by William Somerset Maugham, who was born on January 25th, 1874, and died at the age of 91 on December 16th, 1965. He was among the most popular writers of his era and reputedly the highest paid author during the 1960s. Both of his parents, during the 1930s, sorry about that, highest paid author during the 1930s. His books and short stories were made into movies, into television series, etc. He was so prolific and really profound as an author. He ran the gamut from comedy to tragedy. He was remarkable. Now, both of his parents died before he was 10, and he was raised by a paternal uncle who was extremely cold, emotionally cold. And the early death of his mother when he was 8 left him traumatized, and he kept her picture by his bedside for the rest of his life. He did not want to become a lawyer like other men in his family, so he trained and qualified as a physician. His first novel, Liza of Lambeth, sold out so rapidly that Maugham gave up medicine to write full-time. During the First World War, he served with the Red Cross and in the Ambulance Corps before being recruited in 1916 into the British Secret Intelligence Service. He worked for the service in Switzerland and Russia before the October Revolution in 1917. During and before the war, he traveled in India. During and after the war, he traveled in India, Southwest Asia, and the Pacific, and he drew from these experiences in his later short stories and novels. Did I mention among his books? Among his books, I'll mention 3: Of Human Bondage, The Razor's Edge, The Moon and Sixpence, and of course, I'll throw in as well, Cakes and Ale. Now, this is a short story entitled The Promise, and it's one of my very favorites. My wife is a very unpunctual woman, so when, having arranged to lunch with her at Claridge's, I arrived there 10 minutes late and did not find her, I was not surprised. I ordered a cocktail. It was the height of the season, and there were 2 or 3 vacant tables in the lounge. Some of the people, after an early meal, were drinking their coffee. Others, like myself, were toying with a dry martini. The women in their summer frocks looked gay and charming, and the men debonair, but I could see no one whose appearance sufficiently interested me to occupy the quarter of an hour I was expecting to wait. They were slim and pleasant to look upon, well-dressed and carelessly at ease, but they were for the most part of a pattern, and I observed them with tolerance rather than curiosity. But it was 2 o'clock and I felt hungry. My wife tells me that she can neither wear a turquoise nor a watch, for the turquoise turns green and the watch stops. And this she attributes to the malignity of fate. I have nothing to say about the turquoise, but I sometimes think the watch might go if she wound it. I was engaged with these reflections when an attendant came up, and with that hushed significance that hotel attendants affect, as though their message held a more sinister meaning than their words suggest, told me that a lady had just telephoned to say that she had been detained and could not have lunch with me. I hesitated. It is not very amusing to eat in a crowded restaurant by oneself, but it was late to go to a club, and I decided that I had better stay where I was. I strolled into the dining room. It has never given me any particular satisfaction, as it appears to do so to many elegant persons, to be known by name to the head waiters of fashionable restaurants. But on this occasion, I should certainly have been glad to be greeted by Les Stoney and I. The maître-d'hôtel, with a set and hostile face, told me that every table was occupied. I looked helplessly round the large and stately room, and on a sudden, to my pleasure, caught sight of someone I knew. Lady Elizabeth Vermont was an old friend. She smiled, and noticing that she was alone, I went up to her. "Will you take pity on a hungry man and let me sit with you?" I asked. "Oh, do, but I've nearly finished." She was at a little table by the side of a massive column, and when I took my place, I found that, notwithstanding the crowd, we sat almost in privacy. "This is a bit of luck for me," I said. "I was on the point of fainting from hunger." She had a very agreeable smile. It did not light up her face suddenly, but seemed rather to suffuse it by degrees with charm. It hesitated for a moment about her lips, and then slowly traveled to those great shining eyes of hers, and there softly lingered. No one surely could say that Elizabeth Vermont was cast in the common mold. I never knew her when she was a girl, but many have told me that then she was so lovely it brought the tears to one's eyes. And I could well believe it, for now, though 50, she was still incomparable. Her ravaged beauty made the fresh and blooming comeliness of youth a trifle insipid. I do not like these painted faces that look all alike, and I think women are foolish to dull their expression and obscure their personality with powder, rouge, and lipstick. But Elizabeth Vermont painted not to imitate nature, but to improve it. You did not question the means, but applauded the result. The flaunting boldness with which she used cosmetics increased rather than diminished the character of that perfect face. I suppose her hair was dyed. It was black and sleek and shining. She held herself upright as though she had never learned to loll, and she was very slim. She wore a dress of black satin, the lines and simplicity of which were admirable, and about her neck was a long rope of pearls. Her only other jewel was an enormous emerald, which guarded her wedding ring, and its somber fire emphasized the whiteness of her hand. But it was in her hands, with their reddened nails, that she most clearly betrayed her age. They had none of a girl's soft and dimpled roundness, and you could not but look at them with a certain dismay. Before very long, they would look like the talons of a bird of prey. Elizabeth Vermont was a remarkable woman, of great birth, for she was the daughter of the 7th Duke of St. Erth. She married at the age of 18 a very rich man and started at once upon a career of astounding extravagance, lewdness, and dissipation. She was too proud to be cautious, too reckless to think of consequences, and within 2 years, her husband, in circumstances of appalling scandal, divorced her. She married then one of the 3 correspondents named in the case, and 18 months later ran away from him. There followed a succession of lovers. She became notorious for her profligacy. Her startling beauty and her scandalous conduct held her in the public eye, and it was never very long but that she gave the gossips something to talk about. Her name stank in the nostrils of decent people. She was a gambler, a spendthrift, and a wanton. But though unfaithful to her lovers, she was constant to her friends, and there always remained a few who would never allow, whatever she did, that she was anything but a very nice woman. She had candor, high spirits, and courage. She was never a hypocrite. She was generous and sincere. It was at this period of her life that I came to know her. For great ladies, now that religion is out of fashion, when they are very much blown upon, take a flattering interest in the arts. When they receive the cold shoulder from members of their own class, they condescend sometimes to the society of writers, painters, and musicians. I found her an agreeable companion. She was one of those blessed persons who say quite fearlessly what they think, thus saving much useful time. And she had a ready wit. She was always willing to talk with a diverting humor of her lurid past. Her conversation, though uninstructed, was good, because, notwithstanding everything, she was an honest woman. Then she did a very surprising thing. At the age of 40, she married a boy of 21. Her friends said it was the maddest act of all her life, and some who had stuck to her through thick and thin, now, for the boy's sake, because he was nice, and it seemed shameful thus to take advantage of his innocence, refused to have anything more to do with her. It really was the limit. They prophesied disaster, for Elizabeth Vermont was incapable of sticking to any man for more than 6 months. Nay, they hoped for it, since it seemed the only chance for the wretched youth that his wife should behave so scandalously that he must leave her. They were all wrong. I do not know whether time was responsible for a change of heart in her, or whether Peter Vermont's innocence and simple love touched her. But the fact remains that she made him an admirable wife. They were poor, and she was extravagant, but she became a thrifty housewife. She grew on a sudden so careful of her reputation that the tongue of scandal was silenced. His happiness seemed her only concern. No one could doubt that she loved him devotedly. After being the subject of so much conversation for so long, Elizabeth Vermont ceased to be talked about. It looked as though her story were told. She was a changed woman, and I amused myself with the notion that when she was a very old lady, with many years of perfect respectability behind her, the past, the lurid past, would seem to belong not to her, but to someone long since dead, whom once she had vaguely known. For women have an enviable faculty of forgetting. But who can tell what the fates have in store? In the twinkling of an eye, all was changed. Peter Vermont, after 10 years of an ideal marriage, fell madly in love with a girl called Barbara Canton. She was a nice girl, the youngest daughter of Lord Robert Canton, who was at one time Under Secretary for Foreign Affairs, and she was pretty in a fair and fluffy sort of way. Of course, she was not for a moment to be compared with Lady Elizabeth. Many people knew what had happened, but no one could tell whether Elizabeth Vermont had any inkling of it. And they wondered how she would meet a situation that was so foreign to her experience. It was always she who had discarded her lovers. None had deserted her. For my part, I thought she would make short work of little Miss Canton. I knew her courage and her adroitness. All this was in my mind now while we chatted over our luncheon. There was nothing in her demeanor, as gay, charming, and frank as usual, to suggest that anything troubled her. She talked as she always talked, lightly but with good sense and a lively perception of the ridiculous, of the various topics which the course of conversation brought forward. I enjoyed myself. I came to the conclusion that by some miracle she had no notion of Peter's changed feelings, and I explained this to myself by the supposition that her love for him was so great she could not conceive that his for her might be less. We drank our coffee and smoked a couple of cigarettes, and she asked me the time. 3:15. I must ask for my bill. Won't you let me stand you lunch? Of course, she smiled. Are you in a hurry? I'm meeting Peter at 3. Oh, how is he? He's very well. She gave a little smile, that tardy and delightful smile of hers, but I seemed to discern in it a certain mockery. For an instant she hesitated, and she looked at me with deliberation. You like curious situations, don't you? She said. You'd never guess the errand I'm bound on. I rang up Peter this morning and asked him to meet me at 3. I'm going to ask him to divorce me. You're not, I cried. I felt myself flush and did not know what to say. I thought you got on so well together. Do you think it's likely that I shouldn't know what all the world knows? I'm really not such a fool as all that. She was not a woman to whom it was possible to say what one did not believe, and I could not pretend that I did not know what she meant. I remained silent for a second or two. But why should you allow yourself to be divorced? Robert Canton is a stuffy old thing. I very much doubt if he'd let Barbara marry Peter if I divorced him. And for me, you know, it isn't of the smallest consequence. One divorce, more or less. She shrugged her pretty shoulders. How do you know he wants to marry her? He's head over ears in love with her. Has he told you so? No. He doesn't even know that I know. He's been so wretched, poor darling. He's been trying so hard not to hurt my feelings. Perhaps it's only a momentary infatuation, I hazarded. It may pass. Why should it? Barbara's young and pretty. She's quite nice. They're very well suited to one another. And besides, what good would it do if it did pass? They love each other now, and the present in love is all that matters. I'm 19 years older than Peter. If a man stops loving a woman old enough to be his mother, do you think he'll ever come to love her again? You're a novelist. You must know more about human nature than that. Why should you make this sacrifice? When he asked me to marry him 10 years ago, I promised him that when he wanted his release, he should have it. You see, there was so great a disproportion between our ages, I thought that was only fair. And are you going to keep a promise that he hasn't asked you to keep? She gave a little flutter of those long, thin hands of hers, and now I felt that there was something ominous in the dark glitter of that emerald. Oh, I must, you know. One must behave like a gentleman. To tell you the truth, that's why I'm lunching here today. It was at this table that he proposed to me. We were dining together, you know, and I was sitting just as I am now. The nuisance is that I'm just as much in love with him now as I was then. She paused for a minute, and I could see that she clenched her teeth. Well, I suppose I ought to go. Peter hates one to keep him waiting. She gave me a sort of little helpless look, and it struck me that she simply could not bring herself to rise from her chair. But she smiled and with an abrupt gesture sprang to her feet. "Would you like me to come with you?" "As far as the hotel door," she smiled. We walked through the restaurant and the lounge, and when we came to the entrance, a porter swung round the revolving doors. I asked if she would like a taxi. "No, I'd sooner walk. It's such a lovely day." She gave me her hand. "It's been so nice to see you. I shall go abroad tomorrow, but I expect to be in London all the autumn. Do ring me up." She smiled and nodded and turned away. I watched her walk up Davies Street. The air was still bland and spring-like, and above the roofs little white clouds were sailing leisurely in a blue sky. She held herself very erect, and the poise of her head was gallant. She was a slim and lovely figure, so that people looked at her as they passed. I saw her bow graciously to some acquaintance who raised his hat, and I thought that never in 1,000 years would it occur to him that she had a breaking heart. I repeat, she was a very honest woman. The Promise by Somerset Maugham. That one gets me. It really does. I hope you've enjoyed it, my dears. As I said, it's one that really touches me very deeply. Anyway, that's it for Tales and Cocktails. And the rain is pouring down outside, but we are inside. Stay safe, stay warm, and I'll see you again next Wednesday. Thank heaven and the creek don't rise, as they would say in my youth. So good night, my dears. Thank you so much for being with me. Good night for now.